So thanks, WIYDORVEN, for inviting me on your show today, Global Insights. It's a pleasure to be part of your guest today. Well, before the question, I wanted to just say a few words about AfCFTA. AfCFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, was brokered by the African Union and signed by 44, 55 member countries in Kigali, Rwanda, on March 21st, 2018. So that free trade agreement aims to eliminate tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade in goods. It also aims at liberalizing trade services. It also has a goal of helping cooperation on investment, intellectual property, and then competition policy. And also aims at creating a symbiotic relationship between all African countries, also to have them cooperate on all trade-related areas and all customs matters as well. So the AfCFTA, is going to connect about 1.3 billion people, across the continent of 55 countries that we are, and it's estimated that the combined gross domestic product of the whole continent is going to be about $3.4 trillion. So, and then to come back to your question, it's important we answer that question in a way that allows people to really understand what is at stake here. Between big countries, regional countries, and so on and so forth, a very negative impact on the possibility of realizing what this trade agreement is aiming at. So trade disruptions, okay, that's one major issue that we may have to face. Super can lead to trade wars, sanctions, and disruptions of supply chains. So this can hurt developing countries, including those in Africa. And how can that happen? Well, that disruption, those different issues can impact African countries. It could increase, for example, meaning that high prices and disruptions can make essential goods more expensive. It can also reduce export opportunities, meaning that sanctions and protectionist policies can limit access to key markets. And then third, we can talk about the fact that it may divert critical resources, also different conflicts, geopolitical conflicts can absorb resources that are needed for development, specifically infrastructure and education. And so key areas that I identify are most critical areas within trade. Aspect of it, geopolitical tensions can reduce which are very critical for the development of our continent. Investors can become risk averse and then therefore hurting capital inflows and economic growth, and that can also, and those instabilities, those conflicts, those tensions can also increase financial volatility, meaning that currency fluctuations and capital flight can harm economies and businesses that are really in big need of those. And those conflicts can also exacerbate existing challenges, meaning that developing countries are often very vulnerable to external shocks, making them very susceptible to instability. So these are the main concern that I have, and so I think they are very important for our continent it's important for our continent to be able to do what it can within these geopolitical tensions to find a way to mitigate the impact of those adverse effects. Okay.
The goal is to mitigate the impact of the adverse or ripple effect on the economy, and of course the full implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. In the same perspective, listening keenly to the analysis of the first panelist, I will be coming to you ultimately. In your own perspective, what do you think are the stakes as far as the geopolitical tension is increasing at the global level today? It's a world. The world is a global village, and globalization actually it's in every front, politically, economically. And we're looking at the flagship project of Africa 20, the African Continental Free Trade Area. What do you think are the stakes regarding the happenings around the global world, especially on the economies of countries in Africa?
Well, Clarice, I'm quite concerned about the progress of this particular free trade agreement, this African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and the direction that it's taking from its inception. I think it's a wrong-headed approach for Africa. I think that when you go back to the inception of how we got here. The OAU was formed in 1963, and Kwame Nkrumah at that conference and formation always stated that Africa must unite, and that was the basic principle that brought us to where we are today. And that was in 1963. Now, we're talking about culminating finally in having something that resembles the vision of Kwame Nkrumah in 2063. We're talking about 100 years. I know Kwame Nkrumah, when he said Africa must unite, and other nation states were there at Casablanca or in Addis Ababa, they did not envision it taking 100 years for Africa to finally come together. The only group that benefits are the people that set up the division and the structure that is in place in Africa going back to the Berlin Conference. They need Africa to progress slowly. I'm listening to my friend in Washington, Asia, and I am bewildered by the course that Africa is being pushed forward on. It is European-led. It is led by the United Nations. The African Union has taken a back seat in moving this forward. They have, for the most part, and I'm sure there's some actors around Africa who would really like to stick with the original vision, who would like to move Africa forward, not only quickly, but properly, so that we can fully take advantage of all of the fruits of what can potentially happen that's positive for Africa, and that it positively affects the people of Africa. We cannot move forward in a 55-state solution where we've got 55 different administrative agendas to find a way through this. It will take us another 100 or 200 years to achieve this. And that works fine for Europe, because what we've had in Africa thus far is a very, very prolific and targeted extraction of resources, wealth, and everything else from Africa, including brain drain and the drain of people. So we are, I think, in a situation where we need to be very cautious in how we move forward. And I think that we do need to have more of a general approach. Africa, once upon a time, and certainly back when the days of Kwame Nkrumah, I think it's absolutely shameful for anyone to evoke the memory of Kwame Nkrumah and the vision of Kwame Nkrumah if you're not going to respect the true nature of his words and his vision, which really meant that Africa needed to move swiftly to a unified structure that would benefit Africa ultimately. So, excuse me?
Of course, you're rounding off with a statement. Just go ahead.
Yeah. So that's my concern. We talk about mitigation and mitigating the problems that this is bringing up. As the last speaker mentioned, there is a myriad of things that are complicating a free trade agreement when you have so many countries. I mean, 33 of the 55 countries have essentially ratified or signed on to the agreement. What about the other 22 countries? If you look at a map of Africa, those 22 countries could absolutely wreck and wreak havoc on any chance for there to be a comprehensive free trade agreement or any kind of application of fair trade across 55 different countries. So we've got to get out of the mindset of having this 55-state solution and get to a unitary system that was envisioned in the first place, or just really take Kwame Nkrumah out of your mouth. Don't mention Kwame Nkrumah, don't mention his vision. The OAU needs to understand that. Certainly the Europeans don't care, and they wouldn't understand it. But the UN is pushing this free trade agreement. And again,
sorry to interject. We'll come back to you, MOBLEY, to understanding, of course, how Africa can have an African approach to the problems affecting the continent as a whole. Let's ride on with you, KONRAD Rwartawan. Today we are looking at the geopolitical tensions and the effect, the economic effect of such. So holistically, as a finance analyst, I would love to know how do you actually believe political crisis in the global world is actually influencing global maybe economic markets? You know, the first speaker and even MOBLEY underlined the effects of such tensions on the economy. You have some sanctions and others. So what is, in your perspective as a finance analyst, can you put explain regarding our topic for discussion, given the happenings in the global world?
First of all, we all need the wider perspective, because so I absolutely agree with my renowned colleagues here that this geopolitical and historical perspective as well is absolutely crucial. Sure. And we have, of course, observing the African market and the development of African market, I absolutely agree that this is the moment. A lot of analysts have been talking for decades that when Africa roars, the Western world will panic. That's the moment. Yeah, I believe that we are just a step from that, and that is absolutely true. And we have to think about the conflicts, the global conflicts, and global tensions in both ways, as a chance and as a threat. Of course, the threat of breaking the chain of supply is very important also for African countries, especially we all have this experience what can happen with food chain supply, as we observed on the example of Ukrainian war. And how it was used by the especially Western propaganda for their purposes within this war. From the other hand, of course, for the African countries as producers, as a future area of the industrial development, it's also crucial to have open markets for the future export as well. But in fact, we have to think in two ways. First of all, the moment when especially Western and American, especially analysts discuss about the perspectives for Africa are strongly related to the tensions between America and China. And we should be aware that the moment of full-scale conflict between USA and China, which is absolutely possible or even more than possible in case of Republican winning in the presidential election, especially winning of Donald Trump. This is the moment when Africa is the center of the world because of course, again, because of own natural resources, especially rare earth materials. And Western countries look at Africa as a chance to replace China in the event of the full-scale conflict between America and China. But of course, from some point of view, that is the change for Africa. But for the second one, well, wouldn't it be another exploitation? Wouldn't it be another typical way of exploiting natural wealth of Africa by the former colonial countries? That's the point. That's the point, that they would like to have Africa again as a source of only unprocessed natural resources, not as a place of industrial development. Yeah. We observe that in the energy market, for example, in Nigeria. Yeah? While the development of the American boom of gas and oil produced in the very exploitative for the environment way replaced Nigeria as a source of oil for America. So we have to think about the future of Africa, and I believe that just replacing China or any other country as a source of raw materials is not the future for Africa. Africa had to think about developing own internal markets and creating strong internal markets of the African countries, both together and individually by all interested states, because it's the only way for the self-sufficiency of Africa to achieve self-sufficiency is, of course, food production self-sufficiency. And I think that AfCFTA experience with decreasing import of food to Africa is now quite positive, but too slow, but definitely too slow, and that should be absolutely increased in the future. So Africa absolutely has to be self-sufficient. We all remember the word of the famous war criminal Winston Churchill, who said that any not self-sufficient country is not a serious partner in the global game. That's the point. So and the same relates, of course, to the whole continent, African continent. So that's the first absolutely step. The second is, and I absolutely agree, the about the brain drainage of Africa. It's absolutely devastating for the future of the continent. I work in the universities in the United Kingdom as a lecturer, and I observe increasing number of African students, but with coming here to Britain with intention to stay, not to return to Africa, even if they know that they are overqualified and they are not allowed, for example, to work in line of the education as an accountants, as an engineers, as doctors, and sometimes they just take the opportunity to have some low-paid jobs and treating studies in the UK as a chance to get workers' visa, allowing them to work just 20 hours a week as cleaner, shop assistant, and so on. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy for Africa to have these people lost in the Western market, because they people, like qualified people, skilled people, are absolutely needed for development of African economy, especially, as I said, food production and of course also heavy industry, And I observed that, for example, experience of creating own automobile production, own heavy industry in African country, also related to the development of the free trade zone, is a good direction of the future development, because you don't need to only hold on the partners, even the best one. I absolutely understand why, for example, African countries prefers more achievable loans from China. That's absolutely obvious and natural, but that's the only beginning of creating own power, of economical power of the whole continent.
All right, thank you for that, Konrad. I'll be coming to you subsequently. I think to be able to make good use of multilateralism, Africa needs to be intentional, and to do that, there is need to understand the potential challenges and opportunities that will actually arise from these the multilateralism on the continent Africa. Directing this question to ACHILLE EKEU, who is going to throw more light on the potential challenges and opportunities that will arise from the intersection of global politics and the implementation of the African continental free trade area.
Yes, so challenges and opportunities for the African Continent Free Trade Agreement. Let's talk about the challenges first. The tensions can really fragment the market. A superpower to build exclusion, as we see today, can AfCFTA's goal of continental integration. So so that's a very important thing that could really be happening there. It can exacerbate trade frictions, meaning that regional alliances might prioritize member interests over AfCFTA objectives, and it can also distract from development. Focusing on geopolitical competition can really divert resources from AfCFTA implementation, and so there's also internal issues within Africa that can also hinder the prospect of the success of AfCFTA. Principally, we talk about political instability and conflict that can really disrupt trade flows and investment, and also the structure and how regulations can pose logistical and and legal challenges for our people. So that is the key thing that I really think could be considered as challenges for the implementation of AfCFTA. In terms it can create a united front, meaning that a stronger integrated Africa can have more leverage in global trade negotiations and attract better deals. And the engagement of trade partners, are also is also important, meaning that reducing reliance on any single superpower, for example, or few superpower or few regional or global superpowers can really mitigate risk from geopolitical tension. And also, increase intra-African trade is also very important in terms of opportunity, because by focusing on regional markets, African countries can reduce vulnerabilities to external shocks. So, those are things that I see as, opportunities for the AfCFTA in terms of, integration within Africa.
Within Africa is optimal towards ensuring the total realization of the continent development agenda 2063, and we're talking about the sustainable development agenda for 2030. How can Africa actually attend and move along with the global world? I feel MOBLEY, we've been listening keenly to the analysis, and we're continuing that same perspective. You were actually elucidating on a point of the need to think and have a concerted approach when handling continental issues, looking at Africa as an entity and not separated along borders. So the question is, we are on the aspect of the challenges and opportunities. They've been talking about it. There have been many debates around the challenges and opportunities. But let's look at the challenges and opportunities under the present context of geopolitical tension across the global world, with the words of the African Union Commission Chair Musa Faki Mahamat, who said, in fact, it is a turbulent moment, but then it's a moment for Africa to capitalize on what is happening to benefit the continent in every sphere. So what can you say regarding this perspective?
Yes, Clarice, and also my esteemed colleagues that you have on the panel here. I think we have just some fundamental problems when we talk about Africa, and it begins with who speaks for Africa. We know who speaks for example, the U.S. You've got Joe Biden and soon to be Donald Trump. Again, you've got a situation in Russia where Vladimir Putin is the voice of Russia. China, Xi Jinping, of course, speaking very unitarily for China. But when you look, as I did last week when President of Kenya, Ruto, was in China to negotiate with the Chinese as the state of Kenya, or I see Cyril Ramaphosa or President Kagame out there individually creating the unilateral scenarios of a discussion and negotiation for their particular state. It creates confusion. It essentially puts Africa in a very disadvantaged position. We cannot move Africa forward if we're not talking about mass. Your last commenter, mentioned that we've got to have a mass behind us in Africa in order for there to be serious negotiations. As he said, no one is going to take Africa serious if Africa does not have a constituency in Africa that is massive, that it speaks for. This is why we're losing so much of the African diaspora. And speaking of the diaspora, we have an amazing amount of resources around the world that would love to be involved in the forward progress of Africa. We've got a Pan-African movement that is waiting with bated breath to come to Africa and be involved as their birthright to do so and be involved in moving Africa forward. It is a desperate need to do that. Without Africa, the rest of us who are in the diaspora are helpless and continuously vulnerable because there is no anchor, there is no mass behind any of us in this case. So the fractionalization, 55 different states, 33 who have signed on, 22 who haven't, and the confusion that brings about will continue to plague Africa as it moves forward. It will not be just a simple 40-year movement to this free trade agreement being allegedly ratified by all 55 states. It's going to take much, much longer if we do it this way. Just one other note I wanted to make, Africa is the worst continent. It is the worst area of the world for trade in the intra-African trade arena. Africans don't trade with each other. Africans don't trade from one region of the continent to another, as it should. Meanwhile, you've got Asia. Asia's trade is 65% of inter-Asian trade and activity goes on. In Europe, 59% of the trade that takes place in Europe is intra-European trade. A higher percentage than both of them, of course, is what is occurring in the U.S., but intra-African trade is only 18%. 18% is where Africa is.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. This is actually a very important topic that I think we are going to come to it subsequently. It's good to chart the way forward for the continent Africa, continent that is endowed yet facing so many problems, poverty, corruption, governance lapses, and of course having ripple effects on the economic transformation and derailing the trajectory for growth and development. Now, listening to everything that has been said so far, there is need to understand the international cooperation and multilateral diplomacy in it is actually crucial for Africans to capitalize on for the implementation or for development in every sphere in the continent. So, KONRAD, Rৰীষ্টAS, in your perspective, what parameters can Africa adopt as far as international cooperation is concerned and multilateral development diplomacy as far as the changes in the global world are concerned, especially economic changes?
Yeah, the main problem when we think about the multipolarity is that we are absolutely sure that multipolarity is starting now. That the decline of the old Western hegemony is a fact. It's a pure fact. But from the other hand, we cannot be sure how this multipolar world will look like exactly. And that's the point. That's we can imagine. We can have some theories. We can have some predictions, but it's still not the point that we can be sure, and it's absolutely fantastic because it's a lot of chances for the increasing continents like Africa. Well, speaking about how Africa could find itself in the multipolarity, I think that one of the good examples is the absolute success of the last year Russia-Africa summit in July. That's an example how African countries could cooperate with some partners within the world. So and they can choose the partners they need for separate parts of own development. For example, when I'm talking about Russia, it's of course natural partner for Africa about the energy industry development. When we speak about the country, about the continent, about the countries where still more than 40% people has no access to any other source of energy other than biomass. That's the main point. That's energy development is absolutely crucial for any other next steps of industry development, of creating a strong internal market, and so on. That's the absolutely basic, food and energy. So, for example, such technologies as Russian small modular reactors are absolutely perfect for the African market, and we have to know that when Americans and the Great Britain are still in the very early stages of this technology, it works and it's achievable in the Russian market with Russian experience with the nuclear energy. So you have to think in a very specific way for any part of your future economical plans. So when you find China your perfect loan source and your trade partner, natural trade partner, you have also to see and a country which is strongly interested in export from Africa to China. You can, from the other point of view, see what is the positives of the cooperation with Russia, find some ways of cooperation transatlantic with the South Africa and South America, and that's the point. To think diversification of thinking. Another question is a very important part, but you mentioned about the lack of leadership in Africa, and it's absolutely true, of course. When we remember the great 60s and the great leaders from that time, there is no Nkrumah, there is no Sankara now in Africa, and it's absolutely true and sad. But from the other hand, it's not a question of whoever is ambitious enough to create itself a new leader of Africa. It's not a question of one person. It's a question of the lack of idea. And I believe that African free trade is, of course, very important from the economical point of view, but it also has to create some kind of new African idea. Because as it was, for example, in the 60s with the African socialism, it's absolutely obvious that it's no chance for any kind of neoliberal or globalist ideologies to become a kind of Pan-African ideology. It has to be something own. So absolutely also new wave of Pan-African movement and new way of Pan-African idea. That is what is needed, because it's not only a question of leadership, but a question of the people's support for the African integration.
Absolutely, without interjecting, KONRAD, just to say that Africa presently is under what some people would call political revolution, and of course you made mention about the leaders that we're actually advocating for the oneness of the African continent, but I think that the spirit is actually high now, as we can see the involvement of the political engagement, especially of the population in the political lives of their continent, and we cannot undermine what is happening, especially with the countries in the Sahel region, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We're asking if these are the countries taking the continent to the position where it belongs. Now, looking at everything, the important thing is to discuss how African countries can navigate the changes in the world to impact on the economic development, because at the end of it all, the goal is to see a positive transformation across all spheres in Africa, especially economic transformation that will bring, of course, a good life to Africans. So this question now is being directed to you, ACHILLE EKEU. We're looking at how economies in Africa can navigate the complexities of this global politics or geopolitics to maximize the transformation, especially the economic transformation of the continent.
in Africa are both, good and bad. In terms of, the benefit that we can get from their interests, we can talk about China, for example, that is helping Africa, build robust infrastructure and providing, a lot of loans and investments, and so they're doing that, seeking markets and resources, right? So we have the U.S. that is competing with China, promoting security and democratic values, right? We have Russia that is also, working along, with many African countries, to provide military equipment, safety, and helping African countries fight terrorism, in different regions, different areas of the country, of the continent. I mean, that's what I mean. So, and that is a long-standing partner that is focusing on development and trade partnerships. So, good for Africa, but there are some concerns now because they are very interested in Africa. We also have to wonder because there are always this conditional aid, what they call aid, that is really putting our countries as creating a situation where we are very dependent on that kind of aid. So they are also offering investment that are tied to specific agenda. I'm thinking about LGBT agendas, for example, and those agendas can really undermine African ownership and objectives and goals. So we have to be aware of that. And then competition between powers or superpowers can create rival trade blocs, therefore hindering, continental integration. So African nations also need to, carefully navigate these interests to really secure resources and investment without compromising autonomy, right? So that's what we're looking for. And then we also have to balance competing agendas to benefit from diverse partnerships and maintain and finally maintain AfCFTA as an African-led initiative. So these are, what we need to really, do in order for us to, be very careful of, those superpowers that are very interested in what's happening in Africa today. Thank you.
Thank you, ACHILLE. Well, we are almost culminating the program, right? I will come to you, Mr. Alter MOBLEY. We actually looking at the way forward under the continental free area, because when you have the economic prowess, your voice can be heard at any level. So, and the goal is to ensure that Africa has this large market that will redefine its voice at the international level, especially when taking strategic economic decisions. So practically moving forward, what can be done to ensure that this milestone is attained?
Absolutely. We need to get rid of the tariffs that are across Africa. We need to get rid of as much as we can the borders that divide Africa into a hodgepodge of puzzle. Africa doesn't need exterior aid. We don't need food imported to the continent. Africa should be producing its food and exporting food for that matter. We should not have the levels of poverty that we have across Africa because production is so hindered internally, because once again, the intra-African trade is going to continue to be a basket case because we have 55 different agendas being promoted, not discouraged, but promoted, particularly by the European community. The UN is going to continue to do that because they know that keeps Africa in a weak and diluted position and makes Africa much easier to continue to exploit. We've been talking for years about the recolonization of Africa happening, and we are witnessing that in this African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This is, in fact, the recolonization program of Africa. It is again led by the same colonial forces that occupied and colonized Africa more than 100 years ago, nearly 200 years ago now, and they want to continue to extract from Africa. And they have the perfect situation in this free trade agreement to continue that extraction of resource process and continuing to drain Africa. Unfortunately, that is the free trade agreement and how it will continue to list as it goes forward for another 40 years in its own structural application and its own projection. So they need to eliminate that time frame, make it a shorter time span, get behind countries like Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso with their efforts to move in a different direction. Africa needs to refocus its compasses and get back to a non-aligned movement where it can deal with the US, it can deal with Europe, it can deal with Russia, it can deal with China on its own terms. But Africa has to have voices that can speak loudly and unified in a unified way for the people of Africa so that we can actually be able to get some traction and get what Africa needs from the rest of the world.
Absolutely, Author Mobley. That is the essential to ensure that the relation or bilateral relation or multilateral relations between the continent Africa and other countries of the world, it's mutual and beneficial to all the stakeholders engaging and ensuring international cooperation, I beg your pardon, is profitable at every front. Sorry, I know we still have a lot to talk regarding this topic, but for time purpose, we're going to culminate the program at this particular moment, just to tell our televiewers that we'll come to this topic subsequently to continue to give greater perspectives, insight on these very captivating topics of utmost importance in the redefining the trajectory of African states, especially at the economic level. Just to underline that there are already some countries trading under the African continental free trade areas in spite of the challenges of insecurity and affecting the African continent at the moment. Countries actually working already, and the goal is to ensure that Africa in its entirety can trade under the largest world trade zone, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area. I take this opportunity to thank our guest of honor today for the great insight on today's edition of the Global Insight, for their perspectives. And of course, this is going to go a long way to change narratives regarding Africa and the global world. I want to thank you, televiewers, for trusting the Pan-African Television. Do have a lovely moment in the company of our transmissions. And of course, I'll see you